Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and being part of the talk. So we're incredibly grateful to everyone at DPZ as well for hosting this session. Today, we want to talk about how can we leverage big data for good? How can we govern it? And how do we ensure that people have a say in how data about them is used? So my name is Jake Dushande. I'm from the RSA in London. I personally focus on issues around the intersection of technology and society, but also focus on sort of economic research as well. As a very brief introduction to the RSA, we have a number of projects past and present. So today we'll be focusing on our project on data rights, specifically around, it was called About Data About Us. So we spoke to the British public about their, how they feel about their data rights and data ownership. In terms of other projects we have ongoing, very briefly, we have a project on disinformation, which is due to be released next month. And in the past, we've also had a project called the Forum for Ethical AI, which looked at the, how the public feel about AI in public services, particularly criminal justice and healthcare system as well. But in terms of a broad agenda for today, so we have a few talks, a few fascinating talks for you. Should take up the first sort of 30 to 40 minutes. Firstly, we'll hear from our esteemed colleague, Renata Sampson, who worked with us on the About Data About Us project, who will give us a sort of whistle-stop tour of it. Then we'll hear from Ashim Singh, Director of Economy at the RSA, who will tell us about, or sort of make a case for a European-wide data rights civic movement with the sort of expressed aim of uniting the citizenry around Europe, including the UK, to think collectively about their data rights. We will then, following that, we'll then turn to our special guest speakers, Anne Kantrin Riedel, who is the chairwoman of Load EV, who will offer a reply, and then Ilius Chivilis as well, Vice Minister of Economy and Innovation in the Republic of Lithuania. Great, thank you. So at the end of all that, there will be a Q&A, but please, if you do have any questions, please do feed it through the chat function, which will then get to us, and I can ask at the end of any talks if there's any sort of burning questions that we want answered, then I can put them to the speakers. But without further ado, I think that's everything from me. I'm going to pass on to Renata, first of all, who will introduce us to our past research.
Thank you very much, Jake, and hello to everybody who's watching. Allow me to just share my screen with you all. I hope you can all see that. If not, hopefully what I say makes sense. So, as Jake said, last year and this year, we have undertaken a project called About Data About Us. The project was led by the RSA, by Jake and Ashim, was funded by Luminate, and involved us at the Open Data Institute, the ODI, as experts in this area. So let me talk through what we did. We basically interviewed 47 people. That's a very small number of people within the Greater London area. We did that through 2 focus groups and 1 specific workshop. People that we a broad range of ages, ethnicities, abilities, socio-economic backgrounds, and political leanings. And they were selected based on 1 question, which is, do you think the internet is a positive thing? We basically wanted to talk to them about 2 key areas. 1, the concept of data ownership and control of data about us, and 2, rights and responsibilities around data about us. What was fascinating was that we learned that people had some very, very, very strong opinions. They were very informed about their thoughts on ownership. And whilst a number came into the room saying, yes, we can definitely own data about us, by the end of the sessions, they changed their mind by the sheer force of others in the room saying, no, that's impossible. Concepts of ownership are woolly. I can't own something that isn't solely about me, as data is often about those around us, be it our family, our friends, our colleagues, places we go, our wider network. How can we buy and sell and own something that isn't solely ours? And as you can see from the visual graphic here, one person said, I think the only point we own data is when it's within ourselves, and as soon as we reveal it, we don't own it any longer. This even boiled down to people suggesting that they don't even own the things that they necessarily buy online, for example, software. There seemed to be a much stronger view towards rights and responsibilities. And one of the choice lines that was said to us, as you can see here, is that the idea that we don't have very good rights and responsibilities, the idea that trying to get something we share off the internet back is like taking the piss out of a swimming pool, was certainly one very forward way of saying the problems that people felt they have about when they share data about themselves online. Yet we did also find that they actually had a very strong understanding of the GDPR, and that many of them had used it, be it either through work or for themselves, that they had felt that they had been able to do a subject access request, that they understood about consent mechanisms, they understood about automated decision making. We found what was really completely fascinating about this was that though these were the original questions we went in with, from a policy background, we hear politicians and journalists often say that people just don't understand and therefore don't care about how data about them is used. And we found that that was completely not the case. People were very well informed, had very strong opinions, and really wanted to have them heard. Whilst they said they very much enjoyed being digital citizens and having the internet and couldn't imagine not having the technology that we have now, and as we've seen during the current pandemic, we wouldn't even be able to have this session today were it not for the power and the joy of the internet and connectivity. But that didn't mean that people felt particularly comfortable with the way that their data and data about them was being used and shared. So they expressed a wide range of differing concerns, some of which are outlined here. They felt pessimistic. They were resigned. They just felt that even if they had to give consent, it didn't really matter what they did. Data was going to be used in ways that they weren't very comfortable with and they didn't feel they had control over. They very much said, a number of them said to us, like, I'm not a robot, please don't exploit me. This particularly came around about people. They felt very uncomfortable about data about them being stored. They felt that there should be a broad range of responsibility, including from us, but also from business and from governments. And some of them talk very much about this idea of a dial for control, that maybe I'm happy to share today, but maybe tomorrow I don't really want to. One of the beautiful phrases that was put to us was that the person I am today isn't the person I am tomorrow, and it's not the person I was yesterday. And yet online, we are bucketed into categories where companies respond to us as though they think they know who we are, and we don't have any control or choice about how we can change that or indicate that we may think differently. So whilst people were very, very informed about what they felt, a lot of what they presented was quite negative. And what we felt was that we needed to explain or give people a language to help them be able to talk about data about them so that they could more clearly identify what it was they were comfortable with and what it was that they felt they were uncomfortable with. So we created this types of data about us graphic. This is absolutely based on GDPR, but because GDPR can be quite technical, we felt we wanted to create a language that people could say much more easily. So we identified personal data as the identifiers of us, our name, our address, our email, our telephone number, etc. This in the main was data that people are fairly willing to share about themselves because they've often been asked to share these identifiers about themselves. Indeed, you can't get your Amazon delivery, for example, if you don't share some of this information about you. Sensitive data, we identified the special category data under GDPR that gives much more of a nuanced idea about who we are, our gender, our race, our sexual preferences, biometrics, criminal record, and so on. People hadn't really necessarily considered that this data was going to be collected about them. They wanted greater control over how that might happen and more signaling about how it might happen. But also that we know that there's also a need for protected characteristics to be collected and used for beneficial purposes, as long as that data is anonymized. Behavioral data was the category that actually is the key area where people demonstrated to us they felt the most amount of concern. And we would say, and I'm sure you're all very well aware, that behavioural data isn't data that's particularly been collected about us in the past, unless, of course, we attended a market research session. However, our browsing history, our search history, our purchase history, our preferences, our likes and dislikes are now much of the currency of the internet. And this is where people felt resigned and felt very nervous, and they wanted the language to say why. Societal data whilst it is data about us, it doesn't have to be data about us, about me as an individual or you as an individual. This is really being demonstrated right now in relation to symptom tracking apps. This is data that we would provide to an app about the symptoms we may have in relation to coronavirus, but it doesn't have to be identified back to us as individuals. Indeed, it can be categorized in geographic areas, should be as broad as possible. This should be data that's aggregated, that's that's anonymized, de-identified, and used to create better decision making for society as a whole. This was a whole category that people didn't have the language to talk about, and yet when we discussed it with them, they're like, well, of course I'm happy to share data about myself for that reason. I'm just not happy if you're going to identify me. So this we tested with the groups, and they came away feeling very engaged and inspired about now being able to have a language that they could talk about what was comfortable for them and what wasn't. Overall, this wasn't about what we thought, this was about what they thought. And so we listened to what they told us they wanted, and they told us that they wanted greater honesty and transparency. For example, who, why, what, how long for, etc. Exactly a lot of the problems we're now seeing demonstrated by people who are concerned about some of the applications, track and trace applications, or the idea of immunity passports along the coronavirus situation that we're in. Greater agency and control. They want to be able to opt in and not have to opt out. They want to be asked permission. They want to have much more friction and signposting. It shouldn't just be easy as pie. People feel irritated by being asked a question, do you really want to share this, but actually want to have that moment. And they specifically want to choose what adverts they can see, which is challenging at best. Greater compliance and enforceability, so an end to selling data about them. Greater rights and responsibilities, but with light touch regulation, greater transparency and clear and honest and responsible approaches from business and from government. And greater context and fairness, so much more clarity about when automated decision making is being made about us and an opportunity for that not to be the case. Now, not all of these things are easy for us to do, but the overarching takeaway that we took from talking with people was that context and nuance really, really matter to them. The idea that they are identified in a group, or that preferences that they have expressed at one moment in time are how they feel forever, was actually very, very upsetting and challenging for them. So the idea that we need to understand and ask people much more openly and in a more transparent way what it is that they want to share and why, you will find that people are willing to share as long as they feel comfortable doing so. So we learned all this from the people that we spoke with. And then over the course of this year, we did 2 workshops in London and in Berlin with civil society, with some people from government, and with policymakers. And we found that they too, when we asked them to leave their expertise at the door, but talk about how they felt, they were expressing exactly the same sorts of concerns that the people off the street that we spoke to were expressing. We also found very interestingly that a lot of the conversation in London was around the ideas of ownership, but how complex that is, if at all possible, but that in Berlin there's still a greater awareness and concern about privacy around how data about us is used. So this was a fascinating insight at the start of this year, and we'd very much like to continue the conversation. Unfortunately, we have a global pandemic that's making it a little bit tricky, but what's fascinating is that there are very, very strong calls for stronger rights and good opportunities for the next stage of GDPR version 2, as and when that comes around, but that the ideas of ownership about data about us actually don't have very strong legs attached to them at all. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to hearing what Hashim and the rest of the panel have to say.
Thank you very much, Renata. I will then pass on to Hashim. I don't think there's any questions that come through yet. But again, to the audience, if you have any questions throughout the talks, please let us know and I can pass them on.
Thanks, Jake. Thank you, Renata. As ever, your presentation is on the work that we did together is incredibly eloquent. It's always a joy to hear. So thank you very much for doing that once again. Look, hi everyone. I'm really glad you could join us here today. So my name is indeed Hashim Singh. I'm Director of Economy at the RSA, a think tank in London, the oldest think tank in the world, I think, about 260 odd years old, which in London terms is pretty much a teenager. I lead programs on the future of work, on the future of local inclusive economies, on people, power and place, and also, I suppose, crucially to this, I lead action research at the intersection of technology, the economy and society. And I'm going to spend the next 8 to 10 minutes just talking about these things, talking about building on some of the stuff that Renata was just talking about, the project that we did together. I'm going to share some stats, much of it from my research, that I think really give an insight into what we believe needs to happen next. The case I'm going to make, as has been previewed, is that we need a Europe-wide movement, a civic movement, a set of conversations taking place at local level, but also at the intersection of civil society and government in concert with other orgs in the space like EDRI and so on the future of data, how we govern data going forward. So bear with me, let's begin. So the first thing I want to do is just introduce some of our work. That's the RSA's Tech and Society work. You heard a bit about it earlier from Jake. You've heard about Data About Us. That's the one on the far right there, not in political terms, but just in terms of where it sits on the slide. There was also the first two reports on that list on the left, the center left and the far left, which was our Forum for Ethical AI work. And that's a really important piece of work when it comes to me forming this argument, because what this did was this work looked at how automated decision systems and AI are proliferating right through our public services. What we did is we trialed deliberative methods, that is to say ordinary conversations with ordinary people who are going to be affected by these systems now and in the future. So when you talk about AI in health, we talk to patients. When you're talking about AI in the police service, we talk to people in communities who might one day find themselves at the right end or the wrong end of the law. And the second part of the Forum for Ethical AI really involved us going deep on one particular method, which is called a citizen's jury. Now, a citizen's jury, you may or may not know, but I'll just give you the lowdown. It's a bit like an actual jury. So what happens is over a number of days, citizens come together, they hear witness statements from experts, they talk, they deliberate, they try and work out what's going on when it comes to some of the complex and deep-seated issues in the areas that they're talking about. In this case, as I say, the proliferation of automated decision systems and AI in criminal justice, in health, and also actually in the workplace, so that has less of a public context. It was fascinating work, fascinating. We started this process thinking, well, you know what, if we can just get citizens thinking about this stuff, as Renata said earlier, the press, politicians are often like, oh, citizens don't care about this stuff. Citizens don't want to hear about data, guys. Don't talk to citizens about data. Leave it with us, which of course is just another form of elitism. It's another form of hoarding of power and control. So we thought, look, if we can just open the space a little bit and get citizens talking about it a bit, inform them, that would be really good. That would be a success in terms of the projects. But you know what? So much more than that happened. In fact, when we started, a sort of magic happened. People got into it and got to grips with the concepts far quicker than we realized we were going to. In fact, by the end, it was clear that people were ready not just to be informed and to talk about the issues, but to actually issue governance edicts, governance principles. So you had a broad governance principle that was co-created by ordinary citizens from all walks of life, people who never, some of them never even opened a computer in their life. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but some of them were not particularly tech savvy, whereas others were incredibly tech savvy. And they were sort of saying, well, you know, they were issuing quite complex principles. One of the principles that came out of it was that when it comes to a public service decision about the proliferation of ADS and AI, there always needs to be a human in the loop in the system. So a human needs to have some say in the decision-making process. It should never be totally automated. Absolutely sound civic policy. Furthermore, they created quite complex recommendations around the deployment, the creation, and the accountability for AI systems. I mean, we have literally an entire schematic with 10 really tight recommendations about the design of such systems in public context. We didn't create these. Our experts didn't put these to them. These were co-created by ordinary people who were put through the method and exposed. And for once in their lives, when it comes to tech and data and AI, being treated like adults. And that was just so exciting for us. We who believe in a humanistic, progressive view of the world, it was just so exciting to see that if you give people power and opportunity, they take it with both hands. In fact, I would go further than that, and I'm probably going to be a bit controversial here because we have an esteemed politician on the panel. But I think when it comes to tech and big data governance, the issues are too important just to be left to the politicians. The people have to be involved. There needs to be a human in the loop. Not that politicians aren't humans. Definitely not that. Next slide, please. That was a joke, by the way. I'm English, we crack jokes, what we do. So, give you some stats just to hopefully get you thinking a bit more, maybe challenge you a bit more, maybe boost the conversation a little bit further. Why not politicians? Why not leave this to the politicians? Well, trust is a huge issue. There's clearly a huge kind of PR issue around the way AI is working. It's happening in a very secretive, furtive fashion. More police forces are using facial recognition technology. That's technology that spots criminals automatically from camera feeds than we think and than we realized. And this has created a lack of trust. Only on average, 14% supports the use of AI across healthcare within the workplace or in criminal justice. These technologies can be transformative. AI in healthcare can improve the way that cancers, for example, are diagnosed in a timely fashion, several-fold when used correctly and sensitively. So the fact that we have such little trust is a real social justice issue and a real issue around innovation that we need to get on top of. Deliberation can help with this. Police, there's always an issue with police. Often the trust in police bifurcates around racial grounds, and that's a problem in itself. It was really interesting in the citizens' jury, when we were talking about facial recognition technology in the police force, there was a horrible debate. I mean, the most violent debate we had in the course of running the sessions, and it was essentially bifurcated along racial lines. It was those who said we cannot give the police unfettered power to use AI and facial recognition technology because the data they put in is biased from the start, so the data they get out will be even more biased. And then there were others who said, hey, give the police the tools they want. They haven't got any money. What are you complaining about? So what we're talking about here is broader systemic social issues refracted through the lens of AI and leading to further, bigger iterations of that issue. And that, again, is why deliberation is just so important to getting this right, getting democratic and popular consent. Yeah, I mean, we're currently doing a project on misinformation. This is the next report in the series, and applying these methods, these deliberative methods, these design methods, to getting people thinking about how they combat fake news, misinformation, disinformation. There are subtle differences, if you know them, in their communities. And some of the I can't release the results, unfortunately, because that work is, I would be spiking my own report, and I wouldn't get any column inches on it, and I'll get shouted at by my superiors. But I can reveal some of the stats from it. And it's very clear that there is an issue around a lack of information and engagement that is leading to a misinformed public. The 5G climate change stuff, I mean, that's no good. We talked about the familiarity with automated decision systems. It's not high enough, and this is leading to problems. 53% say they know something about facial recognition. That's probably higher than I would have thought it would be, actually. So, I mean, say they know something is a low bar. I would query that statistic a little bit. It's not one of my statistics. It's from the Ada Lovelace Institute. But it's interesting nonetheless. It doesn't necessarily add or detract from the point, but I think it's an interesting statistic. Grab the next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, lack of communication. When we talk about communication, I prefer to think of it as conversation, two-way, deliberation, right? It's not just about politicians saying we're doing this and then broadcasting. That's no good. These are complex ethical conversations about who we are, the kind of society we want to be, what kind of assets we have collectively, and how they are disposed. Data is one such asset. And, the lack of these conversations is really causing problems right now. And this is only going to be exacerbated. I mean, we already have a sort of fearful approach to technology that's prevalent, as we discussed on the last slide, that's prevalent among the general populace. We have lots of cognitive biases and disconnects within the public. So 61% of British people believe misinformation has been bad for democracy. Fair enough, pretty reasonable observation. But only 33% of people in the same poll believe that disinformation has been bad for them or their family. I mean, if something is bad for democracy but not bad for you or your family, there's obviously some kind of disconnect going on here in the way that these big social issues when it comes to tech show up in our everyday lives. In a sense, the democratic and the civic are misaligned. And I think there's a really important joining exercise that we have to do. And maybe the fact that we try to distance people from this conversation has led to these cognitive disconnects that I think we really need to get on top of. And so when I say getting on top of, what do I mean? I've used the word many times. I think deliberation is a really important part of the exercise around this. I mentioned the facial recognition tech example from our Forum for Ethical AI. That's absolutely borne out by this quote from Anderson Hansen regarding how deliberation impacts the body politic, impacts civil society, impacts people in their communities, in their homes. Deliberation can help resolve some of those disconnects between the democratic and the civic, what's happening to my community and what's happening to me. When these conversations enter your space, the political becomes personal. And when it comes to big data, that's exactly what elites don't want you to do. It's exactly the kind of conversation that big tech companies don't want you to have, because fundamentally, this gives another check and another balance on their pathway, their vector of action. And it was really noticeable to me. You know, we've worked with many tech companies, many of the biggest tech companies in the world in our research, and there's always a pushback. When you say you should get people, you know, they always love to support deliberation, love the idea of it, love the idea of ethical AI. But you ask them to do this stuff, you ask them to subject their product development pathway, their chain, to public oversight, to deliberation, to real democracy. Sorry, we can't do that. What are you, crazy? We're a tech company. We don't do that. That doesn't fit. And this is, you know, this is again why we need a popular movement to begin to make that argument, not just from one think tanker, from an organization, however ancient it may be, to another, you know, a corporate body, but rather more popularly in a more cohesive global sense. So I think we've, you know, I would say, if I may say that, I made a pretty good case for deliberation when it comes to these complex issues of technology and data governance. You know, getting people together, talking in the way that we did with About Data, About Us, in communities, maybe assemblies, maybe in coffee houses. We had a coffee house format for our workshop in Berlin. That was really exciting, I think, and got some really good conversations, talked about everything from whether the translation of data can ever be sort of topologically coherent to, you know, I don't really get what this data stuff is about. You know, there's a whole spectrum of things that surface when you bring people together, and that's really exciting. And so I honestly believe that this needs to be a Europe-wide conversation, a genuine European movement for data governance at civic level. And it's not just because of what it says on the slide here, that deliberative democracy is of its time, it's of now. We lived in a hierarchical society, we now live in a deliberative society. We once deferred to authority, now we're more interested in two-way discussion, dialogue and broadcast. All of this stuff is true, absolutely on board with all that Marshall McLuhan stuff, but there's more to it than that. It's not just about what's nice to have, I think it's about what's tactically right. Yes, there's growing an issue about deliberation, but what we're talking about here, as I've alluded to already, is huge companies working internationally, working together, lobbying to try and get their way when it comes to the international marketplace of tech. Every politician, when they come in, they receive goodie bags from Google, from Facebook, inducements, incentives. Good luck to them. But this is an objective energy that exists in our world that is making change happen, and making change happen often in the absence of anything like appropriate popular oversight or consent. And if we're going to effectively oversee and hold these forces to account, we need power. And we need to recognize that there is power in European civil society. I've been talking to tech companies, right? They see civil society as a tool to influence decision makers. If you have one of the streaming services, right, and they want to push back against the new European copyright laws, what do they do first? They go to their community and they say to them, write to your politicians. They say to them, tell them how broke you're going to be because of these new copyright laws. It's completely cynical, but it's their pathway of operation because they know that's where the power lies. And, again, fair play to them, it's their community, but we need to also have power as well. When they do wrong and when we need to step in, we need to have some power and some agency to push back. The European movement, in the vision that I'm talking about here, it's a local bottom-up thing, but I think it also needs to have links to policy structures as well. And I know ever since I floated this idea on Twitter a few months back, I've had a few fantastic organizations come to me and say, hey, we're doing this already. Don't forget about us. And they are. And I'm not talking about necessarily over, I'm not talking at all about duplicating the work that they do. I think it's adding and complementing to that work. So that layer of that coffee house conversation that we started with Renata's work and our work in About Data, About Us, we're trying to franchise that work into the spaces where it's needed to have those conversations. And then what we want to do is to create a second layer, a kind of link to these policy networks so that policymakers and legislators, they know what people are saying on the ground. They have some information. There's some two-way information going on that ties into all these other campaign groups and this rich stream of civil society activity that's going on. Fundamentally, this is about giving people a voice in the governance of tech. And I think right now that's more important than ever. going to end with one last thing, because I've taken enough of your time. There is one group that has really prospered out of COVID-19. And I'm not saying that because they're bad, and I'm not saying that because there was any mala fides. They're quite the opposite. Their prospering has been because we have relied upon them and depended upon them more than ever, and that is tech companies. Their bottom lines have gone through the roof as a result of COVID-19, the fact that we lean on tech to do the things that we've heretofore done in person. They've made unimaginable profits as people have suffered and people have died. Good luck to them. But I think they know, and we know, and they know we know, that if they really want to maintain their status as social actors for social good, they need to recognize that. And it's their time to work out not just how they're going to continue to make money off of this, but how they're going to continue to support progress, support democracy in our societies. And that's just not just by innovating and creating new products. That's not enough. It's not enough. They also need to give us power and voice and the development of that product process, the development of those algorithms that, if unchecked, can do so much harm to so many. So, from my perspective, you can keep your smartphones, you can shove your Alexa. The only voice I care about is political voice.
Great, thank you. Just before we move on to the final guest speakers, there was a couple of questions that came through the chat that I'm going to ask very quickly before we move on, and I'll save any others towards the end. First thing, which I think can go to both you, Ashim and Renata, is what are your personal learnings from COVID-19 pandemic in relation to this subject, so in relation to people's data rights? Do you have any initial reflections on that?
Yeah, I think what's been super helpful actually is, as we demonstrated with this work, was it turned on its head. The work that we've done turned on its head that people don't care. Both Ashim and I have stressed that. I've been talking in this space for the last decade or so, and people predominantly would say, I have no idea that these things are happening. And then we heard through this work that they were like, walked into the room and I was bombarded with all the problems that people said that they were experiencing and frustrations about the way data about them was being used. What COVID-19 has shown is not that a load of researchers like us are hearing that, but that now governments are hearing that, medical services are hearing that, journalists are hearing that. The reaction to the different types of apps that we've seen in relation to coronavirus has taken quite a lot of people by surprise. There was an assumption, I think, that we can just roll this out, and because it's about our health, and people will just say yes. But actually, society has demonstrated, well, no, I'm not just going to say yes. My health does matter, the health of my family matters, the health of society matters, but actually my data also really matters. It's about me and about those around me, and I want to know what I'm sharing it for and why. And I think there's a real turning point right now, and it comes back again to my the slide I shared from this work of the types of data about us. The societal data that we refer to is also now being understood, and there's a real cry out for open data. Why isn't this stuff being published? Why can't I find information that's not about me as an individual, but it's about society to help me make better decisions for my family, for my workplace, etc. So I think we're kind of having an explosion of understanding, and we should grab that with both hands. But let's be clear, it's going to be quite awkward for governments going forward, but it's going to be a great opportunity for data rights.
Great, thank you. Ashim, did you have something very quickly you want to add on that? Or
I'll be very quick. I think the lesson from the UK side is that our government is, how can I put this? It doesn't know how to do technology at all. I mean, it's rubbish when it comes to it. I mean, we've spent months trying to actually get a track and trace app working. We had a pilot that sort of worked. You know, when we first came up with this, what we were saying to government was we need to start deliberating about this, making sure that people understand their rights, making sure that we have some kind of consensus building around how far the data sharing can go, with whom the data sharing is working. You know, I mean, forget that. Government can't even literally make a track and trace app work. I mean, that's about it. And when, you know, we recently did some outreach with the government of Taiwan, who were incredibly smart and keen when it came to deploying technology and gamifying the coronavirus response, finding ways to help people stay at home and kind of, they were really, really innovative about the way they did it. And, I was kind of sitting there listening to them, and I was getting more and more embarrassed. I mean, it was like Brexit all over again, I just thought, God, I can't believe what's happened to us. So, yeah, it's sort of a deep sense of dismay at the state and quality of British government is the overriding feeling that has emerged from me out of COVID. And that's a very parochial view, I know, but that's pretty much where I am right now. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. On that happy note, I just wanted to make sure that we've got enough time for our guest speakers, so I'm going to move on to Anne now.
Hey, and thank you for the invitation, and hello from Berlin. And so you want me to comment on the statements, right? That was...
Yes, please.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Because I made some notes, and thank you for the input to you both. And I'd like to start with something from Ashim. You talked in your last words about the dependency on tech companies, and I think that's really important because we see this now with Apple and Google, that they made the APIs for the decentralized model for the Corona tracing app we have launched here today in Germany, and maybe I can add some words to that here too, because I'm now happy about the process we had here in Germany. But maybe we start with your point on what they do for democracy or civil society. So we are talking here today on Zoom. Let's face that. Why are we on Zoom? Why aren't we using some open source tools or something like that? Zoom is a company that just forbade or didn't use encryption for the free version of their software. Encryption is a human right. Zoom is enforcing censorship now in China. So what's their take for democracy? So I think this is a very critical point, and it's mostly about convenience. You made the right point that we are getting more and more dependent on these big companies, but because we are too convenient, because I think we don't have enough awareness about data, about what does it mean for our daily lives and how much we are dependent on them. Because I think there's a lack of awareness what we can see with all of our data, which Renata shows us very well. And I think this is a big problem. So also here in Germany, we have a very, very high focus on data privacy and all this stuff. But even though we have high discussions about that data or people who are fighting for data privacy or privacy at all are just hysterical persons and try to prevent any innovation, any digital tools. So we had this with the Corona app, for example. We from civil society, so my organization is from the civil society, we are advocating for civil liberties in the digital sphere. We and other organizations said in the beginning when we started to talk about a tracing app, that if we want to do it, we have to do it to ensure civil liberties. So what I think it's very important, because we here in Europe always talk about we want a different digitalization, different from the US and different from China. We want a digitalization based on our values. But what are our values? I think they are civil liberties, they are human rights. And so data privacy is very important, and we never tried to prevent a digital tool. We said, if we want to have it, please ensure civil liberties. And okay, we can try, even though Bluetooth is not the perfect solution for distant measurements. And so our government didn't listen that much to us in the beginning, but we created this power, Ashim described very well. And so they switched to the decentralized model. They weren't very transparent in how they want to develop this and why they're working with this group and not with another. And today I said, yes, I installed the app because I'm also a role model for a lot of people. And I think the data is very well protected. We can try it if it works. I'm a little bit skeptical in that case, but let's give it a try. And I'm very happy that we had this discourse, because I think this might be exhausting to have this discourse, but I think we totally forget what kind of luxury it is that we are able to have this discourse in a democracy. And I think we need to have it as Democrats. This is our privilege, and we need to have these discussions, and we need to educate ourselves more, not only young people in schools. We need to talk more about learning in all ages, so that we can understand, for example, you mentioned it, what face recognition is, what is happening there, why it is critical, why it is important to forbid it, in my opinion, in the public sphere because of discrimination, all of this stuff. And we need to talk, both of you mentioned the GDPR, and I think what's very important here is that we speak more about honest and dishonest business models, for example. So where is the line? Because you can use data, it's not a problem, we can benefit of it, but we need honesty and transparency. Renate showed it in what also the people demand. And I think that must be the focus, because people want to give data, but they want this honesty. And if you have a dishonest business model, it's not about the data is not the problem. Your whole business model is the problem. And I think we should, especially in this digitalized world, talk more about honesty and dishonesty. And that's my comment on your talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I will pass on to Elias now, just so we have enough time at the end for a full Q&A. And yeah, so please go ahead.
Okay. Well, firstly, I just wanted to congratulate RSA on this fantastic piece of job, which I hope more people will see than just those who participate here. Because I will continue on what Anne was telling, that I think we have multiple levels of maturity when it comes to the data rights. Recently, like a week ago, we got this new Digital Economy and Society Index released on European Commission that basically says that more than 9% of the European citizens are not using internet. So what that means, I mean, on one hand, it's not that big, right, percent, but if you take a look at the countries that are lagging behind, they are having more than 20%, which has never ever used internet. So you cannot talk about the data right or make it, important to the society if they don't even understand what it is. So I think the first maturity step is basically to get people on board, because we will be having more and more problems if we will stay really divided as a region, as a union, as a society, because you can always manipulate with those people who have little understanding on what's happening about. And then, if you ask about, and then, this percentage why I'm telling, it's not just by accident, it's just pure statistics, right? But this also applies to the politicians. So even myself, being as a politician, I can apply that, 9% of our parliament members, they do not use internet. I mean, they can hide, they can say that they might be using, but the statistic shows that they are not. And then, we had this another measurement which called basic skills, basic digital skills. So basically, even if you are already connected, do you understand what you're doing with your computer? And interestingly, that only 58% of the European citizens, they have basic skills. So what that means, I mean, we are talking about AI on the parliament. We are talking about interoperability of the data between the countries, but that means nobody really understands what they're talking about. The good example, please come to the European level meetings where we have officials like myself who are like giving, speeches or the positions on their countries, and you will see most of them reading the papers. Why they're reading? Because they have no clue what they have to say. And it's really, it's really scary. It's scary that, we delegated people to do the decisions that have no clue on what decisions need to be made. So then we talk about this second level, or having the people already engaged into the digital world. As Anne was telling, it's not about the young people and it's not about the old people alone. It's basically all of us. Because even myself, I graduated from the computer science, but none of the languages that I've learned are used anymore in programming. So even if I say I'm a computer scientist by degree, it's not true, because I won't be able, to program anything what's used today. And then that's why I come to this final conclusion, and this was a big shock to me entering the government. Governments have this big issue failing or admitting that they don't understand what's happening around them. I mean, imagine now your prime minister standing up front the society and saying, guys, I don't understand what is the future looks like. I mean, and unfortunately, people, they would not tolerate him telling this. Everyone wants to have this inspirational leaders, even saying the bullshit, but it's rather, the guy we want to follow. It's really interesting now to see this corona crisis throughout Europe, because now retroactively we are so, so brave to say, hey, why haven't you launched the application quickly enough? Why don't you, did this and that? But I should say, I mean, we were absolutely lost. I mean, we as a government, we hit the wall with the car speeding fast, and then we just got, into this crash without really understanding what we have to do. And now at the same time, we have those big companies that are trying to pretend they're good guys. But I should say there are too many interests around to make everything, that honest that people are asking. So my problem is that we had health crisis, we had economic crisis, but I think we also had a democracy crisis over this period of time, because at least I was observing many countries have taken really dramatic changes in the laws. Then it comes, to the access to the data, to the sensitive data, just, for the sake of controlling the virus. But I don't think this is for good. And just because here we come into this third stage of the data rights, where on the first stage, we want people to get connected to the technology. The second, to have them at least understanding what they're doing with those technologies. And then finally, getting the value out of it, getting the benefits out of the technologies. And this is when we can start talking about the digital intelligence, because digital skills are just about usage, right? But the digital intelligence is about, understanding your identity online, understanding your own data concepts, understanding your digital reputation, and many, many other aspects that we are not yet talking about. So I really congratulate on the report you have issued. I might do this presentation on the first occasion on the Parliament, because I'm now asked to present our data strategy, because I'm promoting very much this data-driven public sector. And we have made a lot of progress. Then it comes to the technology, but I think now we have to open up this new conversation about the data rights. And I think you have given so many fantastic insights that I will just copy paste. I won't invent anything on top.
Thank you very much. Very kind words. Thank you. I will turn to some of the questions now. I mean, just then, Elias, you mentioned that 9% of European citizens do not use the internet, and I mean, this level of poor digital skills could lead to manipulation by politicians. We had a similar question along those lines about the connection between the people, as it were, and the democratic representatives. Someone asked, how do we fix and strengthen that connection between the public and democratic representatives? So, I mean, Ashim, you've been talking a lot about deliberation, and that's obviously one way of hoping to strengthen that connection, sorry. But that, behind that is the fact that it's now weakening. So is deliberation the only answer, or is there other ways we can strengthen the connection between the people and their representatives? Elias, do you mind if I put that question to you first of all, and then maybe we'll get some thoughts from others?
Well, if I would knew, I would now be doing something about this. But what I have learned, because we in Lithuania have one of the highest use of the digital public services. So it's like 87% of the society are interacting with the government through the digital services, and 91% of the businesses. So instead of going into the office, staying in the queue, they use, digital services. So how have we reached that? And there's two ways. First, you give benefits and motivation. So look, I mean, you can open up a company without visiting anyone or going to a physical building. And very quickly, people realize that this is so much comfortable, or they can get, a recipe without exiting their home just by connecting to the eHealth. So they really like this. But then there is only the motivation for this, for the group of the citizens that are, so to speak, modern. So what we did for the other ones, we basically made them struggle. So by, for example, making longer waiting times if you want to get it physically, or not even allowing to do the service if not digitally. So in other words, you just force people, to go this direction. And what I have found that there are so many stereotypes, like, old people, they cannot use because they're too old. They're too old for what? For getting the benefits that every single citizen is having? No, it's not true. Everyone is able to get that. So I should say, yes, this connection is critical, but I think we cannot achieve it directly. So you basically have to think about the indirect ways how to make people connected. So in our way, we did it through motivation, and another through the carrot, and another through the, so to speak, forcement to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting take. Anne, do you mind if I ask you a similar question? Just because in your reply, you spoke about honesty and transparency in democracies and how it's needed to build that level of trust with the public. So again, same question to you. How do we fix and strengthen the connection between the people and their democratic representatives?
How we fix the relationship? Well, I think it's about taking things serious and understanding what's going on outside. Ashim mentioned the fights regarding the copyright directive. I'm on a different opinion on there, that I think that civil society and the big companies needed to fight for fundamental questions first. And I think we were on different sides. If we had the opportunity to have the fights, how can we really make the how can we protect copyright in the digital sphere? But I want to make another point there. We in Germany had the discussions after the mentioned emails from you arrived at the parliamentarians. German politicians from the European Parliament said there were a lot of bots sending these emails, and they knew they were bots or they were from Google because they all had a Gmail address.
Pretty big trail.
Sorry?
That's a pretty big set of breadcrumbs, like
yeah.
different Gmail addresses.
And so they thought these young people were bots. And so they were demonstrating in the streets here in Germany with signs, we are no bots, we are humans. And we have the same problems when people say that bots are spreading misinformation regarding COVID, for example, because they don't understand that there are real people with real concerns. No matter if they are good or not, but there are people with believing in conspiracy theories or all this stuff. They are no bots sending out all these messages, so they are real people. And so I think it's a lot about understanding online behavior, understanding online movements and this stuff, so that they recognize that there are huge problems in this world, which we need to address. And they are complex to address. So we can't handle disinformation, for example, not only by regulating platforms. This is an important part in a way, but it can definitely be the only reason or the only solution. And what I wanted to add regarding how can we get, I think there was this little question, older people to technology. Ashim, you also mentioned Taiwan. And I really, really love their digital minister, Audrey Tang. I'm such a
we spoke to her. Yeah.
She's amazing. If you have the chance to listen to her, do it. Yeah. It was the first time I saw a person falling in love when she talked. And we asked her too, how do you get older people in Taiwan to use digital technologies? And due to her answer, I loved her even more. She said, through food. As we said, how food? Yeah, we have in my ministry, it's an open space. It's like an innovation space. There are no real rooms, and we have a nice chef there, and he's cooking, and there's food, especially for the older people, and they're coming and they have nice food and eat and chat. And sometimes they start talking about, oh, we can use technology, because they really have a digital democracy where people are able to participate, to get asked some questions and answer them and talk about their emotions, their feelings. And it's through food. So social gatherings, and I think we really need to rethink how can we get people in touch with technology, with new ideas, with new participation models, and not only like, here's the smartphone, use it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that does help answer another question that we had that a couple of people asked actually, which is around, particularly around data literacy. So, I mean, if Ashim and I are calling for sort of data rights movement, if 9% of the European citizens don't use the internet, that makes it quite difficult for those 9% of people to be able to talk intelligently on that subject. So maybe the answer to data literacy is just food, and we can just feed some people some sandwiches or something.
Food is always a good thing. It brings people together, it makes people have good feelings. And yeah, well, it can also be what I talked about in Germany, that we need a program for everyone at every age. And I think, for example, Finland is also a good example there, where you can look at, especially when it comes to studying or learning about disinformation or something like that. They have a program for every age to teach them about digitalization.
Thank you. Renata, did you want to say something then? You look like you did.
Yes, I'm fascinated, because obviously data literacy is important for us all, but also it's important for organisations and governments too. And whilst the desire for everybody to be online is strong, it's also important that some people that might not want to be. And as we've seen, for example, with the Track and Trace app around the world, that the tech solutionism that people have leapt to actually hasn't been it hasn't actually been the winner that everyone thought it was going to be. Where there are certain parts of the world where it's been human beings phoning up other human beings, we've actually achieved better track and trace methods than the idea of building an app, because of the multiple problems of technical issues, whether it's on Google, or whether it's an Android, or whether it's an Apple, decentralized, centralized, etc. So we jump up and down and get very excited about tech as the solution, and often people are the solution. So also with regards to literacy, therefore, it's important that we understand that we can still derive great value and understanding from identifying those who aren't using technology, as well as those who are, and those who don't understand data, as well as those who do. And it's very important, I think, as we proceed going forward, and also in relation to rights, that where there's gaps, or where there's a lack of data, that is as important as the data that we can collect. So there's two sort of strands there that I think we need to still keep into consideration, that tech isn't a solution always, that people are greater solutions, and that what we don't know, what we can't see, is often as important as we can see.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with you on the sort of dangers of tech solutionism there. And I think that does, again, helps talk about another question we had, which was around, I mean, the whole theme of this summit across the week is around progressives and how we can fight against populism, for instance. The question we had here was, how can data analysis help the progressive movement and persuade people and change society? But I mean, from what you were saying, we want to be cautious about tech solutionism, which I completely agree with.
I think, sorry, if I could come in.
Go ahead, yeah.
I've got to go yet. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, look, tech is one vector through which we currently understand ourselves, through which as a society, we share assets and create some common sense of who we are and what our relationship is to our environment, to capital, to our future. Like, tech is an important vector and an important repository of assets in contemporary life and contemporary society. That doesn't mean that every single aspect of life needs to be looked at through the prism of technology, right? If I fall in love, I don't think there's an app for that. Well, there is an app for that, actually. It's called Tinder. But, but I mean, fundamentally, there's a very different set of things going on there. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is, from a progressive perspective, when you're trying to come up with a theory of the human, all the assets of society are subordinated to this much more hopeful idea that as humans, we can come together, we can play together, we can work together, we can cooperate, and through our shared endeavor and through our various skill sets and cognitive diversity, we can create some better sense of what the good looks like. And, people of a technological mindset, there are tech bros over there in Silicon Valley. Some of them are complete idiots, but some of them have something really fascinating to say about the world that I want to hear about. I want to understand that perspective. So for me, I don't wish to sound like a stock record here, but, I was signed up to argue this. For me, what's less interesting is, what's the precise construction of the technological solution? What's much more interesting is, what is the conversation we have about the technological solution, and how do we bring as diverse a group of people as possible into that conversation so that we collectively discover more about who we are, how we want to organize, what kind of society we want to have. Questions like, does a neo-Marxian identity emerge from the collective kind of sharing culture? The answer to that is probably no, but it's an interesting question to discuss in the context of how technology shapes our polities and our societies. And I think that's really where that in a very philosophical sense is where the beef is for progressives. It's saying there is a vision of technology that isn't just driven by money, it isn't just a conversation between the elites and government, but that is empowering, democratic, and gives agency to more of us. And if progressives can harness that, I'm telling you, they will win. Because when people hear about it, they want it. When people hear what's at stake, they want to have a say in the future. And that gives me hope as a progressive.
Thank you. Can I invite someone else to talk on that point as well, particularly around how we can use data analysis to help the progressive movement throughout Europe? Elias, would you have some thoughts?
Well, it's not that easy. Even, the governments, and connecting to what I was telling before, even the governments were not yet using the data to, so to speak, have, evidences for their decisions. What we have done over these COVID times, we overnight basically implemented the dashboard for the Prime Minister to show all the facts on what's happening in the country. And you will be surprised how many things have been found out. So everyone started shouting like, we don't have enough, we don't have enough equipment in the hospital. But then all of a sudden we get the instant connection to that hospital information system, and we see that they have everything what they need. They just, want to use this moment and, get more funding. Then you all of a sudden see someone shouting on the media saying that, hey, government is not supporting or not doing this and that. But then, you have, evidences that it's absolutely different. So I think, so I'm talking just from my own perspective as a governmental person who wants, that our government would behave correctly and have evidences for the decisions they make. I mean, this is the first step, right? Because this is how we build this overall understanding what data is. Because my problem was 2 years ago when I just came to the office, the first thing I wanted to change the law on the information management. The information management law says that the information resources that the government is having, it is the information system, that's the infrastructure, that's a data center, that's a building, that's a cable. And I said, whoa, 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 it's not an information. This is material stuff. I mean, this is not what we have to secure as a government. We have to secure the data. The data is the only thing we care. We don't care about the infrastructure, about the data centers, about anything else. And it was too transformative idea, and everyone was resisting. They said, no way. I mean, we will not change our law saying that now the key resource for the government is the data. We want, you know, to have all those components around because this will justify us getting the budget. So with this concept now, giving data as a, you know, true source for the government to make the decision, that also builds, you know, a literacy for the data also to be shared with the society. And of course, some countries are really advanced in open data concepts, but I think this is not, so to speak, the only solution, because open data is always, you know, not the data you necessarily need, especially for the democratic movements. Yeah, I'm just, you know, trying to figure out how to connect this, you know, because myself, coming to the government, my only motivation was, you know, not to complain about us being so technologically basic. This is rather, you know, coming inside and doing the change from the inside. And then once you come inside, you realize that, oh shit, I mean, there are much more things you have to do before you can, you know, turn back to the society and give this value from the government. Because essentially everyone has its own customer, and the government's customer is the citizen. But not a single government will tell that they want to serve a citizen. I mean, they want to serve their own programs, their own agendas, their own whatever imaginations they have, but this is not about serving the citizens. So that's why, I mean, it's not that easy as it looks.
A question we had from a listener is how we can use data analysis to help the progressive movement in Europe. But I think if we put it wider than that, how technology or data can be used to help the progressive movement. It's a difficult question, I know.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer. I don't know. Maybe someone else has, but I'm not a specialist for using data. So especially not for civic movements. So I can't give a proper answer to that question.
Yeah, well, sorry for jumping in. I just wanted to say what really works for the countries that have little knowledge on what needs to be done. And that really works those international organizations like OECD, like European Commission, those big international organizations where they come up with the principles. And the countries, if they have little understanding, they just tend, you know, to copy paste whatever recommendations comes in. So my suggestion be working, you know, with those stakeholders who can then influence the local governments. Otherwise, the data will never be, so to speak, given to the citizens.
Mm. Okay, I think, yeah, working with those sort of international bodies that can set the rules, as it were, across borders. Okay, thank you. I'm conscious we only have about a minute left, so if anyone has any sort of final roundup thoughts, then please do speak. Otherwise, we will end the session there. Yes? Okay.
Did you want to go, Renata, or were you nodding? No. I was just going to say, from my perspective, fascinating conversation. I'm really, really excited, Elias, that you're interested in having a similar kind of conversation in Lithuania. So, you know, do let us know if there's anything we can do to help and assist that conversation. Myself, Renata, Jake, and the rest of the team at the RSA, and indeed at DPZ, will be delighted to assist with that. And I would say to anyone who's listening, If you're interested in having a town hall style conversation about data in your community, this movement, we don't need millions of pounds from some international organization to start these conversations. We just need to have the conversations, right? We need to start having them right now and start empowering people. So if this is something you want to do, please get in touch with us, with DPZ. I'm not sure the best way to do that, but I'm sure there will be details in your festival packs. And yeah, let's get this going, because I think it could be really transformative, and it's never been needed now more than ever before.
Exactly. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to my speakers, to all of you here, everyone listening, and obviously to DPZ for hosting this session. If you do want to contact any of us, I believe you can do so, get our Twitter, etc., from the agenda. But yes, thank you, and then see you all soon. Bye.